The whole town told her that mountains should stay untouched, frozen in grief, and swallowed by snow. But a 7-month pregnant woman drove straight into the winter storm anyway, with her loyal German shepherd by her side. And when the dog began pawing at the frozen ground beneath an abandoned cliff cabin, she uncovered something her late husband had left behind 6 months before death took him away. What they found in that cabin would rewrite everything she knew about love guilt and the way a broken man tries to say goodbye. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city, state, or country in the comments. It's always beautiful to see how far these stories travel. Winter in Aspen, Colorado is the kind of winter that looks like the whole world has stopped breathing, where the cold doesn't just chill, it sharpens. Sarah Miller drove the old dark blue SUV slowly along the narrow frozen road leading out of town, her wipers scraping dryly over the windshield as powder snow drifted sideways in sheets of white. She was 7 months pregnant, her belly large, round, and tight under a beige wool maternity coat she had owned for 3 years. She was 32, tall and slender by nature, with gentle shoulders and narrow wrists that always made her look like she belonged in quieter, softer worlds than this. Her hair was light brown, thick and wavy, usually tied up in a loose bun, strands falling freely down the sides of her pale cheeks that had lost some color after these months of grief. Her eyes were gray-blue, tired but not dead. She looked like a woman who had been fighting for air for too long. In the passenger seat sat Ranger, her 6-year-old German shepherd, large-bodied, muscular fur sable with black saddle pattern, golden brown eyes that always looked too intelligent for a dog, the kind of intelligent that makes you think he has been watching every mistake humans make and court memorizing it. Ranger was not just loyal, he had a serious, observant personality, the kind of dog who sat still like a soldier, head high, chest out, always evaluating the world around him before making a move. Sarah had always said Ranger reminded her of a war veteran, quiet, scarred somewhere inside, but steady and unbreakable. As they drove, Sarah's hand kept drifting to her belly. She could feel the pressure, the heaviness. Every mile of road was making the baby shift lower, deeper, like the little one also sensed change coming. 6 months ago, Sarah's husband Michael had died in a skiing accident on a mountain ridge outside Telluride, Colorado. Michael had been 35, solid frame, wide shoulders, an angular jaw dusted with brown stubble, a carpenter with hands like oak, rough but gentle, a man who used to fix everything except his own silence. His co-workers had described him as the quiet one, the kind of man who answered questions with head nods more than words, the kind of man who carried stress inside his chest like a locked furnace. He had been a good man, but he had learned early in life, after watching his father die from a heart attack during a wildfire rescue mission, that sometimes men don't get to rest, they just break. Sometimes that trauma becomes personality, and Michael was like that, solid on the outside, but always drowning in the inside. For the first months after his death, Sarah was numb, like she was the one buried under the avalanche instead of him. She barely left their rental house, a small cabin-style property with cedar walls and a wood stove nobody used anymore. She woke up every morning with the same thought: how can I feel this alone while still pregnant? Aspen residents had been kind in that polite Western mountain way, giving space, giving nods, quick offers of help, but never pushing. There was the mailman, a man in his 40s named Grant, tall and lanky with black hair and a scruffy chin beard, who always wore fingerless gloves while sorting mail. He was simple and quiet, a side character in life, but always gentle when placing things in her mailbox, as if he could sense grief like dogs sense earthquakes. On this morning, Grant had waved her down while she was starting the car, his breath fogging in the frigid air, and handed her a small wooden package, thin, almost like a keepsake box wrapped in old brown paper and tied with twine. "This has been sitting at the post office a long time," he said. His voice hesitant, like delivering this box felt like delivering a ghost. Sarah took it, her fingers trembling because she knew that handwriting. It was Michael's. Sharp angled letters, hard downward pressure like a man who never did anything halfway. She drove away, heart pounding against her ribs. There was no return address. The package smelled faintly of cedar smoke and ski wax, the same scent Michael used to carry home on his jacket after long winter days. At the first turnout on the mountain road where the snowplow had carved a clean shoulder, Sarah pulled over. Her breath was fogging the windshield now, or maybe that was her panic. She tore the paper open. Inside the wooden box was a stack of 3 sealed envelopes and folded beneath a rough, hand-drawn map. Her pulse thudded in her neck as she picked up the first envelope, addressed in Michael's handwriting, "For when you're ready." She pressed it to her chest. In that moment, something inside her cracked. For half a year, she had been running from anything connected to him. Now here he was, reaching out of the grave, not to haunt, but to lead. Ranger leaned forward, pressed his heavy head into her shoulder. She whispered, voice breaking, "I think he left me something. Something he didn't tell anyone." She opened the map. It showed a trail snaking up the mountainside to a symbol, a square drawn near the edge of a cliff. A cabin. A cabin Michael built and never told her. And suddenly, for the first time in 6 months, she felt something stronger than pain. Curiosity. Purpose. Maybe this was the ending Michael had always intended her to reach. The next morning began long before sunrise, the sky still a charcoal blue and the cold feeling like small knives pressed into skin. Sarah stood outside the small mountain motel she had checked into the previous night, a simple roadside lodge owned by the kind of family that did everything themselves. She had slept little. The map Michael left had burned through her mind all night. Her belly felt heavier than usual, like the baby somehow sensed the emotional weight shifting inside her mother. Sarah's legs were slender but strong, though right now they felt stiff as she moved through the snow. Her body was tired, her lower back ached, but there was a strange new energy inside her, a stubbornness she thought she had lost. Inside the motel lobby, there was a woman behind the counter who handed over a thermos of hot black coffee. The woman was in her late 40s, petite brown hair braided back tight, and she had a voice that was honest and direct. Her name tag read Marlene. Sarah thanked her. Marlene looked at her belly, then looked into Sarah's eyes with the silent recognition older women sometimes have, the kind that doesn't need explanation. She only said quietly, "The mountain doesn't forgive the unprepared." She said it with no drama, only a matter-of-fact tone that suggested she had seen too many people underestimate winter up here. Sarah didn't respond. She couldn't. Her throat felt locked by something larger than fear. She stepped back outside, Ranger at her heel. Ranger shook snow off his body, alert, as always, muscles tense, but calm, tail low, ears pricked forward like antennas. He felt the direction like instinct. He kept glancing toward the tree line across the road, the beginning of the forest, as if he already knew where they would go next. Sarah loaded the final items into her backpack. Water, protein bars, flashlight, extra batteries, Michael's letters, then closed the SUV door gently, like any loud sound might break the fragile thread holding her together. And without saying it out loud, she followed Ranger. The first steps into the woods were harder than she imagined. The path was not really a path, just packed snow occasionally showing the broken shadow of a hunter's trail. Aspen trees stood tall and ghostly around them, white trunks streaked with black scars like ink. The air tasted like metal and pine. Each breath burned a little. Sarah's boots sank in deep with every step. She stopped every few minutes to catch her breath and stretch her lower back, one hand under her belly. She felt a flicker of doubt, the thought that maybe this entire journey was ridiculous, even dangerous. But then she'd picture Michael's handwriting, and she kept moving. Ranger would trot ahead, stop, turn back to check her, then continue. He was 6 years old, but moved like a younger dog, focused, determined. There was a reason Sarah trusted him almost more than she trusted humans. Ranger had once dragged Michael out of a snowbank during a blizzard 2 winters ago. Michael had told that story 100 times like a badge of honor. Maybe that was why Ranger seemed so sure of every step now. He had been up enough mountains to know where panic ends and instinct begins. At a fork in the trail, Ranger suddenly stopped. His ears tilted to a sound Sarah didn't hear. Then he trotted toward the right, toward a direction that wasn't exactly matching the map. Sarah hesitated, taking out the map again. The map was rough, hand-drawn, nothing precise, more like memory than navigation. She realized Michael might have drawn that map not as a GPS guide, but from his emotional logic, from the way he moved through spaces, not how a cartographer would. She trusted Ranger. They took the right. After about 20 minutes, the wind picked up, roaring against the treetops until it sounded like a distant waterfall made of air. Then up ahead, movement. A figure. A person. Sarah froze. It was a man in his late 50s wearing a thick red parka jacket with white reflective stripes, a gray knitted beanie pulled low, short gray beard covering his jaw and strong shoulders, suggesting someone used to outdoor labor. He carried a shovel across his back, He looked like a forest ranger. He approached slowly, boots crunching the snow. When he spoke, his voice was deep but gentle, like someone who didn't waste words. "Storm's coming," he said. His name embroidered on his jacket read Dean. Dean had kind eyes beneath weather-darkened crow's feet, the kind of eyes belonging to someone who had lost and learned not to dramatize it. Sarah explained she was following a map her husband left. Dean listened silently, his breath fogging in the freezing air. "Men come up here looking for answers," Dean said finally, "but most of them come back colder than they left." Sarah's voice shook when she replied, "He was building something here, something I need to understand." Dean studied her face for a long second, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition. Not of her, of the pain behind her eyes. "If you go," Dean said, "don't rush." Then he pointed toward a narrow ridge. "That's where the wind gets teeth." He nodded once and walked away into the trees, leaving Sarah with the chilly impression that life up here measured time by different math, a slower, harsher one. Ranger walked forward again, pausing to make sure she followed. Sarah steeled herself and continued. A new fear, but also new excitement, was rising inside her, as though she was walking not just toward a location, but toward a version of Michael she never got the chance to meet while he was alive. The truth was starting to feel close enough to reach, and the wind now seemed to whisper Michael's name. By late afternoon, the storm clouds had bruised the sky into a deep iron color, the kind that makes daylight look like dusk. Sarah followed Ranger up the final steep rise, her breath short, each inhale scraping her lungs like icy sand. Her slender fingers, pale beneath wool gloves, clutched a branch now and then for balance. Her boots sliding, then catching, sliding, then catching. Ranger, 6 years old and built powerful through chest and haunches, moved focused at steady gait, stopping every few steps to check that Sarah could still keep up behind him. And then at the turn of the last ridge, there it was, a wooden cabin. Not large, not grand, but intensely present the way a single violin note can fill an entire theater. It stood just where the cliff bent outward, as though the builder wanted the entire valley to be a witness to its existence. The logs had weathered to a deep, dark brown, the roof dusted in snow. There were small, angled windows framed rough and simple like unfinished thoughts. Sarah stopped. Her legs trembled. Ranger went up to the cabin door and sat very still like a guard at a tomb. Snowflakes hit the wooden walls with the soft hiss of paper against fire. Sarah reached for the door handle. Her fingers shook not from cold, but from the roaring panic of possibility. She pushed. The door gave way with a slow, low groan. The moment it opened, a wave of cedar and the faint ash scent of old fires rolled toward her. She stepped in. The space inside it was silent. A single cot bed pushed against the left wall, a cast iron stove in the corner with a pile of chopped wood beside it, shelves with jars filled with dried herbs, a table, and on the table a leather notebook. Her vision blurred. She walked slowly toward it, Ranger close behind her, tail lowered, no longer alert in defensive stance, but in grieving stance, the kind animals take only when they sense something sacred. Sarah pressed her palm onto the cover. She felt the weight of Michael's handwriting before she even opened it. She remembered the way his letters used to press too hard into paper, how he wrote like he was always carving truth into the world so no one could erase him. She opened the notebook. The first page was a message clearly written for her. "If you have come here, Sarah, then you are stronger than you think. In this place, it was not where I came to leave you. It is where I came to learn how not to leave myself." Sarah's knees weakened. She lowered herself into the single wooden chair. Ranger placed his head on her thigh. Sarah's hand rested on Ranger's neck, fingers tangling through the thick fur as she forced her breath to slow. The next pages were dated short entries, not long confessions. Day 4. Silence is not the enemy, it is the mirror. Day 11. I keep seeing my father collapsing under the weight of flames he could not save. I keep thinking I will collapse the same way. Day 19. I am trying to build a place where my breathing does not sound like begging. Sarah pressed her lips together. All those nights he came home quiet. All those times she thought he just refused to speak. She had never considered that silence was not the absence of words, but the presence of wounds. As she flipped another page, she found an envelope tucked between two pages. It was sealed, her name written on the front. Sarah. She opened it. Inside was a single paragraph written with a shaky hand, like a man writing while crying, but refusing to let his tears fall on the ink. I never meant for my pain to become your prison. I needed to prove to myself that I could exist without fire. I built this place so that one day if you ever needed a place untouched by the world, you could stand where pain ends and choice begins. You don't need to forgive me. Forgive yourself for carrying my silence. She closed the letter slowly, carefully, like someone handling a relic. She leaned back, pressing her hand beneath her swollen belly where the child kicked once a small nudge, a reminder of life insisting itself forward. Ranger nudged her hand again, as if echoing the same message, move forward. She exhaled long and trembling. This cabin was never about escaping her. It was about giving her a place to arrive when survival had finished its job and living needed to begin. She whispered into the quiet cedar-scented air, "Michael, I'm here." And in that moment, there was no avalanche of grief. There was only the valley listening. Night arrived like an ambush, sudden, forceful, and merciless. The wind rose into a violent shriek, slamming against the cabin walls. The temperature dropped so fast it felt like the air froze between each breath. Sarah sat on the cabin cot, sweat breaking across her forehead, despite the cold, one hand bracing her belly as the contraction locked her spine into a curved shape. Her normally pale face now flushed with a feverish rose color. Her long brown hair, usually tied loosely, had fallen fully down her shoulders, damp with sweat, framing her face in wild strands. She was 32, slender, but pregnancy had softened her frame. Now she looked like both power and fragility, held in the same human shell. She tried to breathe through the pain, like the nurse at her OB appointment had once instructed, but here in the middle of an isolated cliff, all she could think was, "I'm alone." Ranger paced the narrow floorboards, tail-stiff ears rotating sharply like a radar dish picking up invisible signals. The storm outside howled. Another contraction hit. Sarah let out a broken gasp and pressed both palms into the wall behind her. She whispered Michael's name into the dark, her voice cracking like thin ice. "I can't do this alone." And then Ranger did something she had never seen him do. He pushed his weight against the front cabin door, with his shoulder nudged the latch with his snout, and shoved it open. Snow burst in like shattered glass. Without hesitation, Ranger bolted out into the white void, his paws disappearing instantly in the depth of new snow. Sarah screamed after him, panic tightening her breath. "Ranger, come back," but the wind stole her voice instantly. Ranger vanished into the storm. Sarah sank onto the bed, panic and pain tangled into a single crushing sensation. She remembered every prenatal caution, stress triggers early labor. And this stress was rewriting every cell in her body. Another contraction seized her like a vice. She bit her lower lip so hard she tasted copper. Time dissolved. She didn't know if minutes passed or an hour. Then a knocking, and then a voice, female, muffled through the roar of the storm. "Hello, anyone inside?" Sarah jerked upright. The door burst open and cold, dense snow air swept in. And standing there was a young woman bundled in a thick, puffy turquoise ski jacket, white snow pants, a wool headband pulled over golden hair that fell straight to her shoulders. She looked about 24, petite but athletic, cheeks flushed bright pink from the cold. In her arms, she held a newborn baby girl swaddled in a gray blanket and tucked against her chest. "My name is Lily," she said quickly, voice trembling from cold and adrenaline. "Your dog found me. He led me here." Ranger trotted in behind her, his entire coat crusted in ice crystals, his breaths heavy and fast. Lily's eyes widened as she saw Sarah's face contorted in agony. "You're in labor," she whispered. She spoke not with fear, but with a steady determination, the kind of strength young women sometimes possess when life forces them to grow up too quickly. Lily gently set her baby down on the cot beside a pillow, then shrugged off her jacket, revealing thin arms and long fingers, small hands but nimble, like someone who had spent many hours working with delicate things. "I worked 1 year as a nursing assistant before I moved up here," she said quickly. "I can help you." Another contraction ripped through Sarah. She grabbed Lily's wrist with surprising force. Lily nodded. "Okay. Listen. Breathe when I say breathe." She moved with instinct, turning Sarah onto her side, placing folded blankets beneath her lower back, instructing Ranger to lie near Sarah's legs for warmth and support, as if Ranger was a second body to stabilize her. The storm outside roared harder, a primal sound like 1,000 ghosts screaming up the cliffside. Sweat dripped from Sarah's temples. The pressure built. She screamed into the cedar air. It was raw animal undeniable. And then the scream broke and a new sound replaced it. A cry. High-pitched, fragile, real. Sarah collapsed back, tears pouring from her eyes, not from pain, from the shock of life. Lily wrapped the tiny boy in the only extra blanket she had. Ranger crawled forward, pressing his large head against Sarah's arm, eyes soft, tail slowly thumping, as if saying, "I never left you." Outside, the wind still howled, but something shifted. The storm no longer sounded like destruction, it sounded like a ceremony. Like the mountain had demanded blood, grief, and fear, and now was returning something living in exchange. Inside the cabin, Sarah held her newborn son close to her chest. Skin touching skin, and for the first time since Michael's death, warmth replaced emptiness. Lily kneeled beside her, her own newborn daughter sleeping peacefully behind them. The world outside was still winter, but inside this wooden cabin on the cliff, something new had begun. Morning cracked slowly over the mountain ridge, turning the hard silver of night into soft gold. The snow outside had settled from a storm into something gentle, like clouds that had chosen to sleep on the ground. Sunlight filtered through the cabin window, catching tiny dust motes floating in the air like fireflies frozen mid-flight. Inside, Sarah sat propped up against the wooden wall, her son swaddled against her chest. Her skin looked paler now, drained from the intensity of labor. But there was a new light behind her gray-blue eyes, not the exhausted dullness she had carried for months, but something like awe. Her brown hair was tangled and loose across her shoulders, strands clinging to her flushed cheeks. She looked older than she had 2 days ago. Not tired older, but wiser older, like a woman who had stepped through one door and now stood in a different universe. Lily, the 24-year-old woman whose presence had seemed like an apparition the night before, hovered close by her posture, protective and maternal, in a way that didn't seem learned but born from instinct. Lily had washed her face in melted snow, and now her golden hair, sticking slightly to her forehead, looked like sunlight itself. Her newborn daughter slept on a folded wool sweater Lily had laid beside the bed. Lily leaned down gently, lifting Sarah's son and placing him into Sarah's arms with an ease that suggested she had done this before, not necessarily birth, but caretaking. Lily was shaping into the kind of young woman forged not by privilege, but by surviving loneliness out in remote mountain life. Ranger lay near the foot of the bed, stretched out long and relaxed. He had shaken off the frost melt from his coat, leaving small puddles on the cabin boards that were already drying in the morning warmth. His golden brown eyes, usually sharp and alert, were soft and heavy, as if he too felt the softness of this new moment. He had spent the night lying half-curled by Sarah's hips, while she slept in short, shallow waves between feeding and tears. Somewhere before sunrise, Ranger had pressed his forehead against Sarah's shin, the way dogs do when they are trying to say something they don't know how to articulate: comfort, loyalty, presence. Sarah looked down at the newborn in her arms. His tiny eyelashes, soft as silk threads, trembled each time he exhaled. She could see a faint reddish tint in the baby's hair. Michael's hair not brown like hers. And something inside her broke, not like glass breaks, but like ice breaks when spring finally arrives, slowly, silently, beautifully. Lily sat down across from her, smoothing her snow pants awkwardly, almost self-conscious, now that the adrenaline of emergency had worn off. Sarah looked at Lily carefully. Sarah realized she had never even asked who Lily was besides a name. And now in this stillness she asked. Lily admitted she had run away from a controlling boyfriend months ago and had been living in a rented cabin at the foot of the valley. He had been older than her by nearly 15 years. Clever, charming, the type that won restaurants with a smile, but beneath that charm was cruelty, manipulation disguised as care, criticism disguised as improvement, and control disguised as protection. Lily had left the moment she realized she was pregnant because she didn't want her daughter raised inside fear. She had been alone until Ranger found her. Sarah listened quietly, absorbing this new history, seeing in Lily a reflection of herself she had not expected. Women who didn't get to choose the moment life collapsed, only the moment after, when they could decide whether to stand or kneel. Outside, winter had transformed. The sunlight off the snow was bright enough that it hurt the eyes, but warm enough that the dark icicles hanging from the eaves had begun to drip. Melting, Sarah held her son and looked at Lily's daughter, both babies breathing the same untouched air, both of them born into stories that should have broken their mothers, but instead had turned them into something stronger. She whispered more to herself than anyone else, "I thought I came here chasing what I lost." Lily smiled gently and replied, her voice soft and steady, "You didn't come here to chase the past. You came here to start what comes next." The words sank through Sarah like sunlight through packed snow, slow, deep, unstoppable. Sarah tilted her face toward the small cabin window. The world outside was still winter, but it didn't feel like loss anymore. It felt like possibility, like beginning. Michael had not built this cabin to escape. He had built it so there could be a place where winter wasn't death, but rebirth. Sarah tightened her hold on her child, her voice nearly a whisper. "He didn't leave me," and the truth settled in her bones like warmth. "He brought me here." The cold outside would come again, storms would return, life would bruise her again. But she would never mistake the cold as punishment again. Cold can also preserve, and from that preservation, life can restart. Ranger lifted his head and exhaled slowly as if agreeing. The morning sun continued to melt the icicles, one drop at a time. Winter was no longer the enemy. It was the witness of her beginning. Maybe it was never just a cabin. Maybe God placed Sarah there, not to remind her what she lost, but to show her what could still be born from winter. Sometimes the Lord does not stop the storm. He leads you through it. And inside that storm, a miracle arrives in the most unexpected form. A newborn child, a stranger with a newborn of her own, and a loyal dog who somehow knew where hope was hiding. If you are watching this right now, you might be going through your own silent winter. But listen, God still works in silence. God still works in the cold. And when everything feels frozen, He may already be preparing the place where your spring begins. If this story touched your heart, please take 2 seconds to share this video with someone who needs it today. Leave a comment below, "God guide me through my winter," and subscribe for more stories like this, stories of grace, hope, and second chances. May the Lord bless you, your family, your home, your heart, your next chapter. Amen.